by brilliant. In the small hours of February 3rd, 1905, the body of Peter Eberhardt was discovered frozen to death in a ditch just outside St. Paul, Minnesota. His body was found wildly contorted by his former boss, Claude Argenvale, who took it upon himself to haul it back to his home, where they endeavored to give Eberhardt a proper and respectful burial. They placed his body in a shed on the side of the property next to a stove with a roaring fire to slowly defrost the corpse. But before anyone could make an attempt to embalm him, the shed exploded in a fiery burst of light, leaving nothing left of Peter save for one button, a boot heel, and a small piece of a watch chain. On the night of February 2nd, 1905, local town marshal approached farm worker Peter Eberhardt with a bottle of nitroglycerin he confiscated from a would-be bank robber while the two were drinking at a local tavern. Eberhardt, fulfilling his destiny of drinking himself into a stupor, bet that he could drink the entire bottle without experiencing any adverse effects. Peter drank the entire bottle of the substance and started on his way back home. He never made it back. And either from the drinking, the nitroglycerin, or the glacial cold of the Minnesota winter, he froze to death off the side of the road. If you wanted to build a railway before nitroglycerin, you would have to manually light black powder, an older form of gunpowder, as mining charges. But you ran the risk of blowing yourself up. Nitroglycerin, shortened to NTG, is a substance invented in 1847 by Italian chemist Ascanio Sobrero. It was vastly more powerful than gunpowder, but also immensely unstable. An early explosion of nitroglycerin in San Francisco leveled an entire building and killed 15 people. A 300-pound crate of the substance was shipped into the city, leaking nitroglycerin. When a worker brought a hammer to open the crate, it exploded, leveling the building. Liquid nitroglycerin is so unstable that even a gentle knock can trigger a chain reaction. This happens very quickly, and a lot of energy is released in the process. Reason why the Nobel Prize exists. The Nobel Prize is named after Alfred Nobel, who invented a method of stabilizing NTG for practical use. While in Germany investigating an accident at one of his factories, he realized that if the liquid was absorbed into something, it could become easier to handle. He found a naturally occurring substance called kieselguhr, which is a kind of diatomaceous earth in the German moorlands, which he could combine with NTG to make an explosive paste that we call dynamite. Where a small bump set off a chain reaction in NTG, dynamite won't go off, even if you light it on fire. It requires a blasting cap, aka a smaller explosive to trigger detonation. It's even safer than substances like gasoline or propane. Making nitroglycerin safer was pretty much everyone's main priority. But while attempting to do just that, researchers discovered that workers in late 19th century dynamite factories who had been suffering from chest pain suddenly found themselves with some relief whenever they clocked in for work. Nitroglycerin capsules, sprays, ointments, and patches are used to treat a condition called angina, a common side effect of some kinds of coronary heart disease. Chest pain can happen when your heart isn't receiving enough blood, usually due to narrow blood vessels. When consumed, the body converts NTG into a compound called nitric oxide, which widens arteries and blood vessels, reducing chest pain. So, how did they make an explosive boom into a medical boom? Manufacturers dilute the NTG with a 0.9% sodium chloride solution or 5% glucose solution to neutralize its explosive properties. Most medications are diluted like this, primarily in order to make doses of active ingredients as small and effective as possible. So, what happened to Peter? Nitroglycerin is a vasodilator, which opens up blood vessels. Peter Eberhard likely got very red in the face, or faint. His heart rate probably increased, and he would have felt nauseated too. But if you remember, nitroglycerin wasn't the only thing Eberhard drank that night. It's outright dangerous to take any medication with alcohol. All of his symptoms would only get worse. The side effects included tachycardia, rapid heart rate, sudden and drastic changes in blood pressure, dizziness, and fainting. It's hard to say what happened inside his body, but I can say that it was not good. Most likely, he passed out along the way home and then froze to death. But this is where it gets a little complicated and a lot more explosive. An explosion is just rapid combustion. The difference between a fire and an explosion is time. Fire, aka combustion, requires three components: fuel, oxygen, and heat. A lighter, for example, has fuel in the form of butane, oxygen from the air, and heat from the spark generated between flint and steel. What makes nitroglycerin so volatile is that its molecular structure already includes both a fuel source and oxygen. It's made up of three nitrate groups attached to a chain of hydrocarbons. The nitrate groups contain a bunch of oxygen. The hydrocarbons are a common ingredient in all fossil fuels. So, if my math is correct, that's 2 out of 3 steps. When nitroglycerin decomposes, it releases a lot of heat. And according to the law of thermodynamics, energy cannot be created or destroyed, only changed from one form to another. There's more energy in a nitroglycerin molecule than there is in the molecules of what it breaks down into. So, when the bonds between nitroglycerin break down, the extra energy is vented into the air as heat. So, there we have all 3 ingredients for fire, all in one place, breaking down in a matter of nanoseconds just from a simple jolt. Remember, the difference between fire and an explosion is time. It's honestly a miracle that Peter didn't explode while drinking from the bottle in the first place. But moving him was also dangerous. The freezing point of nitroglycerin is unusually high, at 13 degrees Celsius. Frozen NTG is a little less reactive than liquid NTG. So, in the time before dynamite, it was commonly shipped frozen inside large square cans that could weigh up to 50 pounds each. That isn't to say that the frozen form isn't explosive. It absolutely is. There are tons of stories of miners attempting to unfreeze chunks of solid NTG in the field and straight up burying themselves under mountains because they did it ever so slightly wrong. This story is over 100 years old, so obviously we can't know exactly what happened that night. But we can make some educated guesses. News articles about Peter's fate mention that he was drinking with the town marshal. And if any of you have had a sip of Devil's Firewater, you know that he was probably feeling overconfident. The town marshal, like a frat boy at a house party, showed off the explosive. And Peter, like another frat boy at a house party, accepted a challenge that no one wanted or asked him to do. Now, by the grace of whatever god he believed in, he didn't explode. But since nitroglycerin and all medications react badly with alcohol, his body was not having it. You know, look, I don't know about you, but if I'm gonna be sick, I'd like to be sick at home. Which is exactly where Peter tried to go before he passed out and froze to death along the way. Later, after they found his body, they carried it to the home of his employer, Claude Archenvale, and laid it out in a shed for embalming. Little did they know, he was literally a human bomb popsicle that could blow them to kingdom come at the drop of a hat. As the frozen nitroglycerin in his guts started to melt, either from heating up too quickly or from some natural jolt during the thawing process, he exploded, taking the entire shed with him. One way or another, there was nothing left of Peter Eberhard to bury. The discovery that nitroglycerin could be stabilized was obviously one of the most dynamite scientific breakthroughs of all time. But to make breakthroughs like that, or even to solve problems in our daily lives, we need to know how to think like a scientist. That's why I love Brilliant. Brilliant is a learning website that offers a massive range of courses on science, problem solving, and even calculus and special relativity. With over 60 courses, Brilliant takes complex and fascinating subjects and turns them into fun, interactive lessons that aren't only educational, but also just plain fun. I thought Brilliant's scientific thinking course would be a breeze, but as it turns out, going into a problem thinking you already have the solution is the first thing they tell you not to do. I'm having a blast learning about structural engineering, optics, even fluid dynamics. Brilliant gives you fun challenges and puzzles that help you develop a framework to tackle anything life throws at you and improve your critical thinking skills. Go to brilliant.org/brew to sign up for free. And also, the first 200 people will get 20% off their annual premium membership. This video is sponsored by the Great Courses Plus. Like most everything humanity has built, social media is a tool we can use for good or for evil. It's not all just selfies and Snapchat, memes and memories. We can use social media to establish networks of like-minded people. We can use it to make our loved ones laugh, to keep updated on the state of the world. We can even use it to generate a series of false identities in order to defraud major hotel chains. Okay, well, most of us won't use Instagram to do the last one, but today we'll learn the sordid tale of a young boy cast aside into poverty in childhood who grew up to be one of the wealthiest people on the planet. Or at least that's what his Instagram would have you believe. Today's episode concerns fraud and identity theft, which are crimes. We're not lawyers. Please do not take anything we say as legal advice. And with that out of the way, let's get into it. Our story begins in the capital city of Colombia, Bogota. Jose Enrique Moreno was born in 1970 as one of the country's throwaway children. Never knowing his parents, he struggled to survive in the middle of the country's ongoing issues alongside his brother. Together they learned that survival was its own reward, and it was priceless. Providence came to them in 1977 as Jim Gignac and his wife arrived in Bogota to pick up the two orphan brothers through an adoption program. The couple whisked them back to their home in Plymouth, Michigan, where he was given a new name, one that would linger in and out of the spotlight depending on which side of a jail cell he found himself on, Anthony Gignac. By second grade, Gignac could speak English fluently, but his years living on the street had influenced him in ways no one could untangle. He desired wealth, freedom, and, most fervently, he wanted to be important. It began with white lies. He told his classmates that his mother was rich, and his biological father was famous actor Dom DeLuise. At age 10, he executed his first con. His mother received a call from a car dealership claiming that her Mercedes was ready to be picked up. Gignac had somehow convinced the owner of the dealership that his father was a wealthy Saudi royal who intended to buy him a fancy car. But when no money and no royal Saudi appeared, the plot quickly fell apart. When his adoptive parents divorced, Gignac was separated from his brother, with whom he had been together since they lived on the streets. Something broke inside Gignac. How could they take away the only person that had ever been there for him? Everything was falling apart, and so, after spending time in 2 psychiatric hospitals and a halfway house, he ran away from home at age 17. Gignac surfaced in Los Angeles, where he was caught using a credit card under the name Omar. There, he cooked up the MO that would carry him through the majority of his future schemes. He claimed that he had engaged in sexual relationships with members of the Saudi royal family and was paid millions in hush money in order to maintain the propriety of the Saudi crown. This was not his only identity, though. At times, he claimed to be a Saudi arms dealer. It was an inspired grift and exploited stereotypes of supposed Saudi Arabian regressiveness and the average American's inability to distinguish between a person of Arab descent and a person of Hispanic descent.
Because he was originally Colombian, right?
Right. Gignac, with his new persona in tow, set off for bigger marks. He cheated the Regent Beverly Wilshire Hotel for $3,500, amassed over $7,500 in limo. His beloved Chihuahua Foxy in diamonds and Louis Vuitton clothes. After spending a short time in jail, Gignac ran off to Honolulu to stay at the famous Halekulani Hotel for Christmas. There he conned an innocent couple into writing him a check for $8,500 for a share in an oil field that didn't exist, as well as another couple into paying for the full cost of his stay, a tab of over $20,000. By now, Gignac was in his 20s, and in 1993, he cheated the Walt Disney World Grand Floridian Beach Resort out of $14,000 in credit card charges. He was caught, given probation, then vanished, resurfacing at the Grand Bay Hotel in Coconut Grove. Here he met two unidentified men, who he invited up to his hotel room after a shopping spree. Unfortunately for him, they were no saints, as they beat and robbed him. The police were called, but Gignac slipped away, only to be caught in Chicago, where he was finally extradited to Florida to be put on trial for his earlier indiscretions. He was charged with fraud and grand theft, with a sentence of 2 years, spending prison not deter Gignac from his scheming. Even before his trial, he was contacting lawyers as his new identity, Khalid bin Al Saud, which is the name of an actual, real member of the Saudi royal family. Prince Khalid bin Salman bin Abdulaziz Al Saud, the 9th son of the Saudi king Salman bin Abdulaziz Al Saud. One of those lawyers was poor Oscar Rodriguez, who was told that Gignac was a member of the Saudi family and they were going to get him bail. Thinking that Gignac's influence could raise him to the position of legal advisor for the royals, Rodriguez dispatched two bondsmen, O'Connell and Marty, to post the $46,000 bail for the supposed prince. The duo picked up Gignac from the Miami jail and drove him back to their office where they waited for the money to arrive. It never did. So the bondsman did what bondsmen do and told him, "We gotta put you back in jail." On the way back, however, Gignac came up with a plan. The prince told the two men that there was an American Express office nearby where he could get the money to pay them. He entered the office in tears, exclaiming that he'd been robbed and his credit cards stolen. The clerks agreed to issue replacement cards if, and only if, Gignac could tell them the last two transactions the real Prince Khalid had made. Miraculously, he managed to conjure up the answer to corroborate his stolen identity. A transaction made in California and one made in France, making off with a card with a measly $200 million limit.
They actually gave him that?
They actually gave him that. And with it, Gignac immediately went on a spree, buying 2 Rolexes and an emerald bracelet before jet-setting off with the bondsman back home to Michigan in an empty first-class cabin he had bought out expressly for the 3 of them. On arrival in Michigan, he went to a university where he pledged a $1 million donation and then turned around and booked a flight back to Miami. Not long after they got back, the prince learned that Rodriguez's daughter was being taken from Miami to New York for school. Playing a generous and selfless man, Gignac offered to upgrade them to first class and book out an entire floor of the Four Seasons Hotel if he could hop on board with them. Unfortunately for, well, everyone involved, a call came in from the American Express fraud department telling O'Connell and Marty that their prince was currently committing credit card fraud. He's not the prince, and he's got a boogie. Said O'Connell to Rodriguez before they frantically jumped on the next flight to New York. Rodriguez also called his wife, pleading with her to make sure he stays in the room. When they finally caught up to Gignac, he screeched, "I'm calling the embassy! I'm not going back to Miami!" To which O'Connell replied, "You're right. You're not going back to Miami. You're going out the window," throwing the prince across the room. O'Connell didn't end up actually throwing him out the window, but with Marty and Rodriguez's help, they did get him to LaGuardia Airport. Although, as Gignac spotted airport security, a wrench was thrown in the works. Gignac shouted, "I'm Prince Khalid bin Al Saud! I've been kidnapped!" before pointing to O'Connell and screaming, "He has a gun!" Before they could comprehend what Gignac had said, the police materialized around them and threw Rodriguez, O'Connell, and Marty to the ground. "I have a shotgun against my head because they think I've kidnapped a prince," says O'Connell of the incident. Before long, O'Connell managed to show the police his paperwork, and they were released. Determined to get Gignac back to Miami without a hitch, they opted against air travel, and instead chose to drive back from New York to Florida, with Gignac in the trunk. But don't worry, they let him out for breaks. Sometimes.
Wait, but how did he get the answers right to the credit card charges?
Gignac is nothing if not a beguiling man, and he revealed to the bondsman, in addition to his real name and identity, that he had bribed 2 clerks at the Amex office to give him the right answer. Remember the shopping spree he went on after he got the card?
Oh, it was the Rolexes. He bought the Rolexes as bribes for the clerks at the office.
Well done. I knew I hired you for a reason. It's Easy to sit back and think, I wouldn't be taken in by a scam like that. But we never really know until it actually happens. The majority of people, if asked if they were in the top 50% of intelligent people in the world, would say yes. But how can that be true?
Intelligence isn't as important as critical thinking, Brew.
Of course.
That's why since we started researching this episode, I've been watching lectures on the Great Courses Plus.
Oh, you have a subscription. That's great. The Great Courses Plus is a video service with lectures from top professors and experts on all sorts of topics, from history to science to economics. You gain access to a library of over 11,000 videos on pretty much anything you can imagine.
Stephen Novella's Guide to Critical Thinking Skills has a whole lecture about how our culture can impact the way that we think about the world.
It's the entire basis of gignac scams. The typical person doesn't think much about their cultural biases, and it's easy for scammers to exploit that.
Exactly. Click the link in the description and sign up now at thegreatcoursesplus.com/brew to get a free trial and start learning.
Gignac was released from prison in the early 2000s, but he quickly found himself in prison once more in 2003. He was released again in 2011, but after being caught for more fraud was sent back for another year. In the years, he tried to buy a hotel for $200 million, got interrogated by the FBI, and tried to escape prison by throwing shampoo over the floor of his cell, then lighting it on fire. He's a busy man, you see. But it was in prison where Gignac cooked up his best and final scheme. To pull this off, he needed something he'd never had: access to the lives of the super rich. He found this in the form of Martin Williamson, a British asset manager living in North Carolina. By all accounts, Williamson was much like Gignac, charismatic, larger than life, but he kept his business legit, for the most part. Saudi Princess Dalal has said of Williamson that he claimed that he knew everybody under the sun. A co-worker said that he was a master global networker whose line of bullshit would change depending on the person he was talking to. Together with Gignac, it was a match made in heaven. Or hell, I guess, because they're doing crime. I don't know how it works. But the point is that Williamson offered Gignac a liqueur of legitimacy. The two of them set out to build a shoddy investment company for the Prince, allowing him an excuse to bump shoulders with the world's elite. Martin Williamson International, LLC, incorporated in 2015, soon found itself with 26 loyal investors, wiring them a total of $8 million for first dibs on the IPO of Aramco, the Saudi Royal State Oil Company, which the actual, real Saudi royals were planning to launch that same year.
For everyone at home, an IPO stands for Initial Public Offering. When a company gets big enough, they go on the stock market, and an IPO is the first chance anyone has to buy stock in that company.
Yes, Gignac and Williamson were fraudulently selling the opportunity to buy stock before anyone else. Where Williamson and Gignac's plan fell to pieces might surprise you. Here's a hint: you can buy it at the grocery store.
Grocery store?
In early 2017, Williamson told real estate agents in the Miami area that the venerable Prince Khalid bin Al Saud was looking for a palace on Fisher Island, one of America's most exclusive and expensive communities, for privacy after a gastric bypass surgery. The duo quickly found one, and the Prince immediately offered $21 million for his palace to be wired to the owner overnight. The money never arrived, because it didn't exist. But that didn't keep Gignac from spending like it was the end of the world. He trotted around with bodyguards he hired from shopping malls and dressed up in suits. He claimed every building he passed was in some way owned by his family, and he tipped everyone in $100 bills. A real Mansa Musa of a man. The long con had begun. But before everything came together, Gignac decided that he wasn't satisfied with just a palace. He wanted more. This luxury hotel, Fontainebleau, Miami. And he was willing to offer real estate mogul Jeffrey Soffer $140 million for the legendary hotel. Soffer believed that he had found his sucker. $140 million for the hotel was vastly more than it was worth. If this all went through as it appeared, it would be Soffer, not Gignac, who could take the title of Confidence Man. However, as you can probably guess, nothing went as though it appeared. Gignac demanded that Soffer shower him with gifts. as was customary in his country. But that was just a ruse. Nevertheless, Soffer granted him over $150,000 in jewelry and art. Continuing their negotiations, Soffer flew Gignac to Aspen on his private jet, where the prince flashed his Gucci-ensconced iPhone, catching a glimpse of Soffer in a video he posted to Instagram. But everything fell apart when Gignac ordered the wrong dish at one of Aspen's hottest restaurants. He ordered prosciutto.
Oh, I get it now. People who practice Islam don't eat pork. They're not allowed. It would be haram. And if Gignac was really a Saudi prince, he would have known that.
The Quran forbids Muslims from eating pork and pork products. Soffer knew this, and the federal agents he contacted also knew this. And they would have caught Gignac in Miami if it weren't for the divine intervention of Hurricane Irma. The prince would remain a prince. But not for long. In November 2017, Gignac, after attempting to flee the country, was nabbed by federal agents at JFK Airport after submitting a false passport at customs. "I'm a diplomat with diplomatic status," he screeched, but to no avail. On May 2019, Gignac was sentenced by Florida court for 18 years in prison for fraudulently assuming the identity of a member of the Saudi royal family in order to build relationships worldwide, including in South Florida, receive gifts, and conduct a large-scale scheme to defraud would-be investors, according to the Florida Department of Justice.
Is this the end?
Not as of yet, at least. Who knows? Maybe Gignac will continue with his old habits from a federal penitentiary. Maybe once he gets out, he'll go right back to conning. Only time will tell.
How many times was he in prison overall?
Let's see. According to my count, he has been in prison at least 5 times, and spending an undetermined amount of time in jail here and there for an overall total of 33.5 years in prison.
And how old will he be when he gets out?
67 years old.
Let's see. When he gets out, he will have spent over half of his life in prison.
It's a little sad, if I'm being honest. Even before that little Colombian boy landed in Michigan, he had already been left behind. When you're thrown away like trash, there's nowhere to go but up, and nowhere lower to fall. Despite the notoriety, the palaces, the Rolexes, and Gucci dog purses, none of it could make him happy. As he said to his personal designer, Perla, a year or so before his final arrest, "I feel so alone at times. It hurts." Primary criticism of virtually every paranormal story out there is a lack of credibility. Either the person claiming the events happened lacks credibility themselves, or you just don't have any other corroborating evidence, like other people that witnessed it, other credible people that witnessed it, or in many cases a lack of video or photo proof that said paranormal event happened. But in the case of the story today, you not only have a highly credible witness, a NASA robotics engineer, you also have other corroborating witnesses that are from that NASA engineer's family that were there and witnessed it with them. And you have, albeit limited, you do have video footage of what they are claiming happened that was paranormal. But before we get into all of that in today's story, if you are a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, well, that's what my channel is all about, and I upload 3 to 4 times a week. So if that's your thing, if you could gently pulverize the like button and then turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of my uploads every week. Alright, let's get into it. Bill Vale has always been incredibly scientifically minded. He's always had technical jobs his whole life. He took a job for 15 years at NASA as a robotics engineer. He also spent a little time as a pilot for NASA as well. He is just somebody that is very process-oriented. And in fact, his family and friends, they say this with respect, but they
say that, Bill, he lacks an imagination. He's super pragmatic, super to the point, and doesn't really have time for, call it, creativity. It's all about facts. In 2002, Bill and his wife separate, and it catches Bill a little bit off guard, and it almost prompts like a midlife crisis for him, where, before it had been really his work with NASA that had been fulfilling to him, and now he has this huge gap in his life, and suddenly, he's looking around and he's like, what am I doing all this for? I don't have a family anymore, like, what am I doing? And so he decides to move back home to Arlington, Texas, where his little brother lived. So when he gets to Arlington, he feels like he can have a fresh start in a way. He has family around, so he doesn't feel quite as lonely, and he actually just takes a job at his brother's water purification company because he wasn't sure what he was going to do. He just knew that he needed to do something. So he gets a job at this water purification company, and he starts working with his brother, and he finds that even though it's not the same type of work that he was doing as a robotics engineer at NASA, it was nice to be working day in and day out with a family member. So Bill has only been living in Arlington for just a couple of months, and he'd only been at the water purification company for maybe a couple of weeks. And so when a Saturday house call was called into the company and no one really wanted to do it, Bill thought, you know what, I'll take one to the team, make a good impression on my coworkers, and I'll take the house call. And what it involved is part of Bill's job was to go demonstrate how to install and use this water purification system in customers' homes. The dispatcher for the water purification company said to Bill, she goes, hey, listen, this is a little bit weird, but the person who called was adamant that you be there at 5 o'clock, not a minute earlier, not a minute later. And it was probably only about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and he's like, so what do I do? And she's like, I don't know, like, go get a bite to eat and just make sure you're there by 5. And so he does that. He's like, that's weird. But he drives around and he parks outside of the house a little ways down the street. And a couple minutes before 5, he gets out and he starts heading over to the property to do this house call. He starts walking up the path to this big brick house at like 4:59. And as he's getting closer to the steps, he can hear through the front door, which you can already tell it's slightly open. It's not latched all the way. He can hear screaming inside of his house. It sounds like a woman screaming, and it actually sounds like she's screaming, get out of here. But he doesn't really know what to make of it. He has a job to do, so he walks up to the door, and even though it's open, he knocks. And now he can literally hear through the crack in the door that someone in this house is screaming. And he's listening, and finally he decides, well, I should probably just open it up and make sure everything's okay, because I can hear someone screaming inside, the door's open. So he opens it up and he walks inside. He takes one step inside of the residence and just kind of peeks around, and he can see a little bit down the hall off to the right, there's an opening to a room. And in the room are 3 men on their knees in a little circle, and a woman is walking around them in a circle, and she's holding a book in her hand, and she's speaking in tongues. Just nonsensical, couldn't make sense of her language, but periodically as she's circling them and she's touching each of their heads, she's screaming, get out of here, leave these people, get out of here. Bill is about to leave. He knows that this is just too weird for him, but right before he does, the woman who's walking around the 3 men on the ground looks up at him and points directly at him and doesn't break eye contact and just holds her finger out pointing at him. And he gets this very strange sense that, like, this woman wants to do harm to him, and so he just runs out the door and is like, yeah, no. Goes back to his car and he calls the dispatcher back at the water purification company, and he's like, okay, I just took an insane house call. The lady in there is crazy. I'm not doing it. Don't reschedule, and if you do not put me on it because I will not go in there. Bill was a very straightforward guy, and he's just not going to let his imagination run wild with what they were doing. Those people are crazy, and that's not my business. It's not my problem. And so he forgot about it. He just goes home to his house, and he turns on the TV, and he gets his microwave dinner, and he's just sitting there eating his food and just having a nice Saturday night to himself, when out of the corner of his eye in this other room, and keep in mind, Bill lives alone and has no pets. Out of the corner of his eye, he thinks he sees something small dart across the ground. He couldn't tell if it was flying through the room or if it was running through the room, but he just was like, oh, now I got some rodent or a bird or something in my house. It must have snuck into the chimney. And so Bill is not scared. He's mostly like frustrated that now he has to deal, as pretty much anybody would do when some random creature is running on your feet in the middle of the night. And he's like, great, my bedroom on my bed. And so he flips on the lights, and now he's just mad because this is right in the middle of the night. It's the last thing he needs. And he lights on and he searches the room. He looks under, his dresser. He looks in the closet. He looks under his bed. He looks everywhere. And he can't find this thing. He's stopping periodically to listen, and he can't hear scurrying or anything. Did I imagine that as well? Because, I guess I don't know if I saw something darting out of the corner of my eye when I was watching TV. I think I did. And just now, could that have been in my dream? Because he wasn't really awake for it happening. He woke up to it and thought it's what happened. And so he started to tell himself that, you know what, I'm somehow creating this weird thought in my head. Like, I probably didn't see anything downstairs, and I was probably having a dream about this, rodent in my house, and that's what prompted the thought that something had touched my feet. And so he's like, all right, whatever. Turns off his lights, and he goes back to bed. So he falls back asleep, but shortly thereafter, he wakes up again when his bed is violently shaking. And he wakes up, and his bed's shaking, and it stops almost immediately once he's awake. And he thinks that they're having an earthquake, so he jumps out of his bed, and he's looking around to see if things are going to start falling on him. He runs to the window, he looks outside, he can't tell what's going on. He runs into the other room, and he can suddenly tell, because he's in a bit of a panic, that there is no more shaking happening. But the shaking's done. The house is totally silent. And he runs back to his bed, and he has this thought, like, could I, in my sleep, have shaken my bed? And he had one of those huge 4-poster beds, and he's like trying to move it, and Bill's a big, strong guy, and he can barely move his bed. And he has this memory of, my bed was literally shaking. And he's like, now there's 3 times that something strange has happened, and I can't make sense of it. And being a very kind of pragmatic person, and not one with, as his family said, a wild imagination, he did not have that. He's like, okay, let's find out if there was an earthquake. So he goes online and he starts researching earthquakes. And he's thinking maybe if the earthquake had just happened, that the news would break right then and there, some headline. There's nothing. And so he's like, okay, what other rational things could have caused my house to shake? Because there's no other damage in his house. Nothing fell, it was just, he felt the shaking and that was it. And so he starts researching, what's in the area, and he finds that there was a military base, actually it's an air base, right near his house, a couple miles away. And he's thinking, okay, well, when the fighter jets are taking off, that take off at all hours, maybe there's a sonic boom from one of the jets accelerating. And he didn't know if that was it, but he thought it could be it. And then he said, oh, well, there's also all these oil rigs that are drilled in the area. Maybe there was an accident. So he's researching for, recent accidents at oil rigs. And he's trying to find a rational explanation for this bed shaking incident. He also can't help but feel like, what happened with that thing I saw? That was feet, he's not connecting the 2 events, but he has this weird sense that either something's wrong with him, and he's losing his mind, or something really weird is happening in his property. So as he's trying to find this rational explanation, his internet goes out. And so he tries troubleshooting it a couple times, but he can't get it to work, and so he calls his service provider to just have them see if they can fix it. And so he calls customer service, somebody picks up, and they're like, yeah, your internet's out, we'll fix it for you. And they put you on a brief hold. And so they put him on hold, and as he's sitting there, listening to elevator music, staticky sounds started coming through the receiver. He's just noticing it. It's nothing significant. But then a voice comes into the phone that is speaking nonsensical language that sounds almost threatening. At some point, Bill is just totally unsettled by this voice, because it's just going on and on. He's been on hold now for 2 minutes of this weird voice. He just hangs up. And in just a couple of seconds, he gets a call back from the same customer service rep that he had just been speaking to. And he had an accent, and Bill picked up on it and said, hey, was I just talking to you? And the customer service rep said, yes, sorry, we got disconnected. And Bill said, did you hear that? How that could have been possible, because we use a very secure phone line when we talk to our customers, and there's really no way for someone to actually block my ability to speak to you. Even if someone was on the call, you would still be able to hear me, and I was trying to yell to you and you weren't hearing me, so I don't know how that would have happened. I definitely heard the voice, I don't know what that was, and we're so sorry. So both of them are definitely weirded out by it, but the customer service rep, he's got a job to do, and he's like, hey, your talk to you soon. He hangs up, and Bill's left with his internet working again, but now that's the fourth strange thing. He has the thing that runs across the room as he's watching TV. He has the thing that ran across his feed at night. He has his bed shaking, and now he has this like devil voice speaking in tongues on the phone that the customer service rep also heard and couldn't make sense of. He decides to, I'm done doing research for the night. It's 3 in the morning or whatever it was. I'm gonna just try to get a couple hours of sleep because this is just starting to freak me out a little bit. So Bill gets back in his bed and he's trying to sleep, but he can't stop thinking about the fact that there have been 4 strange occurrences in the span of just a couple of hours, and he can't help himself but start to feel a little bit worried that something that he doesn't understand is going on, something bad is going on. And as he's sitting there desperately trying to sleep, he swears he can hear some sort of sound underneath his bed. He knows it could be his mind playing tricks on him, but it doesn't matter. He thinks he hears it, and it's now he's officially